Okay, so now I have done 12 rows, and that is how big this is for me, which is going to be absolutely fine. So I can fold this in half. Now it is a bit wide at the minute, and then I know I can pop my hand in here and it's long enough for me. And I did 12 rows, so I know when I go to make my second one, I will be chaining 25, adding 1 extra chain for the turning chain, and I will be crocheting 12 rows. So I don't have to bother measuring everything. So we know this is right, so we can, I'll just cut a bit tail. I always like to have more tail than I need. Now, how you fasten off. So we have our last stitch here in the hook. Now I always like to have more of a tail end to sew than I need, because it's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. So I've cut the yarn. So now I just bring the yarn through the last stitch on the hook the whole way through and pull it, and that's it, fastened off. Now when it comes to deciding which is the top of your hand warmer and which is the bottom of your hand warmer, so I always like the last row that I did is the bottom of my hand warmer, the bit that goes around my wrist. And where I started off when I did my chain, that goes around my fingers. Because where I started off with my chain, if you pull that, it's a little bit tighter. And that is because we have done a chain and we have worked into the chain. Whereas our last row, we've worked it into our previous rows. So it's always going to be a little bit looser. So that is how I work out which is going to be the top and which is going to be the bottom. So let's just turn this around so we now know here's the top. So we can fold this over, and what we want to do now is pin the top and the bottom. So I'll take out one of these stitch markers. And I am going to pin the top of my work. And we will pin the bottom of the work. Now we need to decide where our thumb is going to go. So I normally go like, how much do you want, where do you want your thumb to stick out? So do you want to have a nice little bit around your fingers? And then you could have your thumb here and then here, or we can leave a little bit more on our wrist and we can put our thumb maybe here. So we put a stitch marker here, so we'll just do another pink one so we can distinguish between the top of our wrist warmer and the bottom of our wrist warmer. So when we go to sew, we are going to sew down as far as there, and that's the bit that's going to go over our fingers. So then we want to leave a gap for our thumb. Now we don't want a massive gap for our thumb either, like that'd be way too big. So about the same gap that we left there. So we will put there. So we would put the same colour stitch marker in this end here. Now, before you start sewing, check and see how it feels. So I'll just put that in. Now, that will be okay for me. That's grand. And when you make, obviously before you start sewing, you have both hand warmers made so that you can, this is my other one that I've made. So when you have your other one, you are going to mark, when you fold it in half, you are going to have your stitch markers in exactly the same position in your second one. So you know where you're going to be sewing. So they're going to be exactly the same. And you can always make 2 hand warmers different colours. You can have one purple, one grey. You can have one black, one yellow. You'd be like a bee then. Or you can have an orange one and the red one, whatever way you want to work it. But as long as you make both of them the same and you fold them in half and you have the tight end for the top and the looser end for the bottom. Now, we're going to get sewing. I have a yarn needle for sewing. It's got a wide eye, so it's easier to stick the yarn in, and it's got a blunt end. And it's important for a sewing needle when you're sewing yarn to have a blunt end, because if it's sharp, it cuts the fibres, it tears them, and your work might go fuzzy, it might rip apart, and you don't want that. And I have here a tip if you cannot get your yarn through the eye. Now I'll just tear this off and I'll leave that there. If you have a small little bit of paper and you just tear a little bit off and you want it to be able to fold in half and go through the eye. So if it's a bit too big and I get my scissors, we can trim it to make sure that it fits through the eye, which is important. Will that fit through the eye? Oh, yes, it will. Well, what we do then is, like, this end here is all fuzzy, so it's not going to properly. Now we can trim it, but I don't want to trim it just in case. So what I do then is I will just sandwich it in the piece of paper, get my needle, and then I can stick my piece of paper through, and all going well, which did not all go well. There now, bloody hell. Let's do that again. I'll just twirl these up and we will sandwich it. 99.9% of the time this works. First time, every time. So we have it sandwiched. We put the sandwich through the needle. Yay, it worked. And that does generally save time. Now, this is already attached, so now we're just going to sew. So we're just going to bring our needle, make sure it goes through the stitches. You're not just catching like one loop. Where's a loop? One loop. You want it to literally go in and catch the stitches. So that's gone through. So now we'll bring the yarn back over here. And now, because this is the start, I'll take out the stitch marker here because it'll make it easier. And see, this here is just one bit. So I want it to catch a little bit more. See, I wanted, because this was just where I fastened off, so I'll go in here and there and pull it tight. Now I go into the next bit down there and see, look, I've caught everything, and then come back there and in, make sure I've caught everything. And we keep doing that until we reach the stitch marker. And don't leave big gaps between the stitches, like thinking like if I leave a big gap, it's going to make it go quicker. You'll just have gaps in your stitches and it won't look nice. So now we've reached this stitch marker. So what I like to do is put a few stitches here, because remember our thumb is going to be here, so we want to make sure it's good and secure. Now I'll just take out this stitch marker here. Now we want to weave in the end. We do not want this end to come out ever, 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 ever. So how I work this then is I pick up some of the stitches. So if you see here, I'm going to go under a couple of the stitches in the rows. Now if I do that, I don't have to go through too many. Pull the needle through. Make sure you're not going through to the front. You just want to grab the ones that are in the back. Now we are going to go back over these stitches, but we don't want to follow exactly how we came through, because we'll just pull the yarn out. So instead of going underneath the first stitch, we'll skip the first stitch and we'll go underneath the second stitch and back the way we came. So that was 2, and see, it's not coming out. So now we'll go back and we'll go over the last stitch and back this way, catching the stitches as we go back, and that should be enough, not for when, if you wash it, it's not going to fall apart. So now we'll just trim this tail close to the hand warmer, but you want to make sure you're not cutting any of the important stitches. And now we get to go from the bottom to the thumb. Don't hit the stitch. And now another way of putting the needle, putting the yarn into the needle, that some people I do see doing, is they just fold it over the needle like this, and you have a little bit there pinched, and then you can wiggle the needle over the yarn, and that works most of the time, but sometimes it doesn't. So now we shall take out that stitch marker there, and we're going to go in here. Now this is kind of, you're sewing it the opposite way than what we did there. We have gone from the back to the front. Okay, so now our needle goes in the back, catching the stitches, and in through the front. And like, make sure this is over here so that it's not curling down there. So, and we keep doing that until we reach our thumb. Now, if you're doing your hand warmers and you want one that's maybe not as loose, you can drop a couple of stitches. You can say do a chain of 22, depending on whatever chain fits around your hand. you can drop a couple of chains and make it slightly tighter, or if you want it really, really loose, you can add a couple of chains to make it good and loose. So now I have reached the stitch marker, so I'll do the same thing again. I will do a few stitches around it, because this is where your thumb is going to be going in and out, so you want to make sure it's good and strong. And we will do the same thing again. We are going to run our needle underneath a few stitches. So there I've caught 1, there's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and sure, we'll go to these ones over here. And then we pull this through. Now don't pull it too tight, because otherwise it's all going to like bunch up like this, which you don't want. You want to have it just a little bit loose. Now, remember, we don't go back in the same way we came out. We skip the first stitch and we go underneath the next stitch. And we can run the needle underneath all of them. And we do that again, so we'll do this a third time. And that should be perfectly fine to keep your work secure. And again, let's trim that. Now, this is a wide one, but I wanted this one wide for myself. Now, obviously, we are going to have to turn our work right side out. So all our stitches is on the inside. And now I have, which I wanted it loose. Now, you don't have to have it really loose. You could have it, like this was 25 stitches. And then I added 1. So if I wanted a more snug one, like this here would be more snug. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. This one here has 17 stitches. Now this would be a bit tight on my hand. So if I wanted it tight, I would probably do 20 stitches plus 1. And then it would be just okay. I can't, what did I do for this one? This one here was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. This one here was, I think there was 18 on this. And that one there is definitely more snug on my hand. So it depends on how tight you want it to be. So this one I did 25, so it's quite loose. That was what I wanted. But if you want it tighter, just do a shorter chain. And if you aren't 100% sure, what you can also do is do your chain and do your first row and measure it again and see. Do you have enough to go around your hand and sew it as well? But yeah, that is it. You can make your hand warmers. You can crochet them long so that they grow. They're like going all the way up your arm. Or you can have them short. It's up to yourself what you want to do. Now, happy crocheting.